Good afternoon. If you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 16. Again, that's Exodus chapter 16. As you are turning, kind of share with you a current event that just happened last year. Some of you may be familiar, some of my Asian brothers, you may know of this. But the largest traffic jam that ever happened that year occurred last year between two cities, the city of Tibet and the city of Beijing. And the traffic jam started so long that it would take 11 days for one car to reach from one side of the city to the other. The traffic jam lasted over 74.5 miles. Even when it was fixed, it would still be a 1 to 2 day journey. I mean, people were so angry and so upset that people would loot each other's cars because they didn't have enough money or have enough food. During the evening, some would go and steal clothes from each other because they didn't have enough clothes or they were just sweating out of their bodies. And to some extent, there was stabbings that were occurring because people were just so frustrated that cars were not moving, cars were breaking down. And some people were so hungry that they would sell the food they have in their car and the water that they had for 5 times more than what they were originally worth. I mean, complaining. And it's not much different here, right? I'll give you a good example. You go on, I went on I-35, and I saw a van pull over with the fish sticker, and the windows rolled down, and this lady is yelling obscenities and flipping the bird at somebody who had just cut in front of her. And so it's not much different here. We complain, and most of the time we're not stuck for 11 days. Right? So imagine, transport yourself to the culture of the book of Exodus as Israel is traveling through the desert as they just got out of Egypt. They're going to be stranded in this large traffic jam, right, for well over 40 years. I mean, we're not talking about 11 days. We're not talking about a couple hours. We're talking about a plethora of days that we can't even describe. And so read with me, starting with verse 2. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out of the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And so they had just gotten out of Egypt. They have spent about 30 days. They ventured out for 30 days, so now they're in the desert, a desert called Sin. And it's between the land of Elim and Mount Sinai, so somewhere in between, and that's where we're at. And so they start grumbling and complaining, and they're led by the most unlikeliest of characters, right? Moses, Aaron, and you can make a case for Miriam. Moses would be the one who was kind of like the nomadic man, right? The mole, the guy who kind of appears out of nowhere. And then you have Aaron, who's kind of like your most available bachelor, right? He's the smooth talker. He's the people pleaser, right? Give him anything out of gold, and he'll make something out for you, right? Any jewelry you want. And so here you have Aaron, the people pleaser. And both of their characteristics collide. And Miriam, you don't know much about her, and she doesn't do much. And so you have a kind of like irregular characters leading the people out of Egypt. But not only that, you see a series of complaints throughout the passage. You just ran into the first one. And I call these a series of fall and responses. And so this is your first fall and response. You see the people already starting to complain. And starting to complain. What does God do? Well, look at his response in verse 4. Directly to Moses, he said, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you." Verse 4. "And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction." So God immediately responds. He responds not in anger or wrath, but he immediately provides for them. The people complain that God provides. Now, this is not out of the ordinary, because if you were to go to Exodus chapter 15, they've already set the precedent of complaining. They've already complained over 3 times in Exodus 15. This is not out of the ordinary. They complain again. Okay? And a lot has to do with this culture that had been ingrained in their minds as they were in Egypt, as they were enslaved. You see, they were part of a country that was very pantheistic. I went to Kennesaw University, and I downloaded a PDF of well over 155 gods that the Egyptians worshiped, and they're over 11 pages. I had to condense it in order for it to fit in my hand. But that's how many gods they worship. That was part of Israel's DNA. And so as they get out, they now have to put all their trust and their reliance not upon 155 gods in whom they probably knew the names well. They probably knew who they were and what they had done for them. Okay? But they're false gods. But now they had to put all their trust in one God, the God of Israel, right? And so Moses had to do all this work to psychologically break them down. And so he does it in a very interesting way. Look at verse 6 with me. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, "At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us?" Verse 8, Moses said, "This will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings in which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord." John Locke, a British philosopher, would prove the existence of God through sense perception. That if you just read Scripture and you see the way the words come out, they speak to you in the sense that it appeals to your natural senses, right? God doesn't speak in such a supernatural way that he extends himself beyond what we can understand. So look with me at the text. I want you to look at verse 6 with me. Underline, if you have your pens, the words, the phrases that I will tell you as I read here. The first phrase I want you to underline is, "You will know." The idea that you will know. See, the people understand who God is, right? Just from their forefathers. So through their knowing, underline the next 3 words I will tell you in verse 7, "You will see." Okay, by sight. You see, God is speaking through Moses so that they will know and that they will see and that they will understand with their natural senses that God is real. Now, if you just look with me again, I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but look at verse 5 briefly. Or verse 4. Right? The Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instructions." This is all a test. But God will appeal to them in a natural way and answer their question. You know, many of us hate tests, but this is a test. This is an open book test. God will reveal himself to them in a very natural way. And so how do the people know? And how will the people see? Look at verse 10. "It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud." See, God had appealed to them through not just by knowing, but now by sight. But the people of Israel already knew this. They've seen the cloud. They've seen the fire by night. So what else does God have to do in order to prove to them in this open book test that God is real? Look at with me in verse 8. Moses said this will happen when the Lord gives you meat. Again, the Lord is appealing to them again, giving them the meat, something that they can taste, something that they can touch and possibly smell. And look with me further down. You have another clause where it says, "For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him." Again, the Lord is not someone that's so transcendent that he cannot appeal to them, but the Lord hears them. Again, the language here is used for that culture, for that time, for that audience, so that people will know that God is real. And for some reason, the people complain and they gripe and they can't get it through their heads that gods made of wood are far more insignificant than the God who is real. And so this is what you see. Look at verse 13 with me. And so God continues to prove himself to them. So it came about an evening that the quails came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. So God just provides. He provides in abundance. How do I know that? The verb covered in the Hebrew. It is defined as an army getting ready to attack a nation, and it comes up as a swarm, as a massive swarm, and it overwhelms the other army. You see, God is not just sending one quail or two to feed the entire camp. He's sending a whole army, not just quality of food, but quantity of food. And so here, Israel is just overwhelmed that God is sending them so much provisions, right? They're just excited and so elated and so grateful and so thankful. Far from that. Far from that. Charles Spurgeon said this about God's provisions. He says, day by day you must seek help from above. It is a very sweet assurance that a daily portion is provided for you in the Word, in your ministry, in prayer, and waiting upon God to receive renewed strength. In Jesus, all things are laid down for you. So continue to enjoy your provisions, right? Be grateful. Never go hungry while the daily bread of grace is available at the table of mercy. Never go hungry while the daily bread of grace is available on the table of mercy. You see, God is very much merciful to the people of Israel. He sees their plight, and yet they continue to grumble. So the first set of fall response is that the people complain. God responds by providing for them, right? The manna and the quail. With me, verse 16. We will see the second fallen response. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of this every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. The sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little. Verse 18. When they measured it with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. Moses said to them, let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until morning. And it had bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat. But when the sun grew hot, it would melt. I mean, how many of you read verse 19, and immediately, like the NBA replacement refs, right, this week during Football Sunday, couldn't stop throwing the yellow flag. Right, here's your proverbial yellow flag. And again, what does Israel do? They commit another personal foul. What is this personal foul? Well, they disobey. Moses told them, look, you collect for one day, but don't store it, because God's going to provide more for you the next day. What does the Israelites do? Well, they store it. And what happens? And when they store it, the worms come out of the food the next day. It just spoils. And it shows their lack of trust in God. You know, something is so amazing as you read verse 16 to 20 is the idea of God's provision for them. John Calvin would say that as the manna fell from the sky, as the little pieces of bread fell from the sky, they would sweep up the manna, and as they swept it up, you would have a leader in the community that would distribute the food amongst the people. I actually disagree with that assessment because it kind of takes away from the superintending care of God. It kind of takes away from the miraculous provision that God had provided for them. So if it means that somebody just simply distributed, that means you don't see God's hand at work here, because each of them had to go out and gather. Each of them had to show their trust that God will provide the manna. Right? Moses didn't do it himself. He had to rely upon them to trust the very words of God. So scene number one, we see the people complain and God provides. Scene number two, we see the people disobey, yet God shows his perpetuity in his provisions. He continues to provide. Isn't that somewhat similar to God's grace? That no matter how much we